Today I'm sharing my view on how meditation can inform psychotherapy and help take it to the next level. This isn't only important if you're a therapist of some kind or a patient, but also if you're just a growing human being and you're unsure about how psychology and how meditation fit together. We'll ultimately talk about the insight that is fundamental to any kind of personal transformation, the core human insight that is at the heart of the great spiritual traditions, and I find that psychotherapy is sadly lacking. We'll also talk about how meditation can catalyze our psychotherapy and our inner work, and we'll also talk about how that fundamental insight into the human being can change how we do psychotherapy and how we do deep therapy work and inner work. So I want to say before I begin that I'm not a qualified therapist or psychologist, but I do coaching and I teach meditation. And I think that one thing that gives me a big advantage over traditional psychologists and therapists and whatnot who've been through the standard training is that I've done a lot of meditation, basically. I've seen firsthand how my psychology works. I've deeply felt my emotions. I've deeply seen my mind and how it operates. And I've also seen the deeper truth of my identity. And what I do is I give people tools that they can use for the rest of their life. So my coaching and my classes aren't about, oh, let's come together for 20 minutes and let's feel good. And then after that, let's just go back to our ordinary life and, forget about what happened, forget about that nice experience that we had. No, if you take it seriously enough, working with me, you get a set of skills that you can use for the rest of your life. And I have to be honest, in therapy, I don't see that happening. I didn't see it as a patient, and I don't see it much in the therapy that goes around. So I'll be talking about, based on that perspective, what meditation can bring to the traditional therapeutic approach. The first thing it brings is direct insight. What I find is in psychology is that there's a huge focus on the models and the theories and the academic stuff. And this is important, especially when it covers areas of psychology that we can't directly access as individuals or that aren't immediately obvious with a bit of introspection or whatever, like the psychology of masses, for example. But let's face it, much of psychology is focused on the individual and their first-person experience. And in my opinion, without the first-person insight that meditation and other spiritual practices gives you, you can never truly understand how your mind or your emotions or your psychology work. And you can't understand how that works for other people either. You can't really be a therapist then. It's kind of like being a maths teacher and telling everyone else how to do maths, but you yourself can't actually do it. Like, how does that fit? How does that work? I think what happens is we think about these things too much. We think about the topic of psychology too much. We don't see it. We rely on authority figures and, the standard psychological corpus. And we talk about, Sigmund Freud said this and Carl Jung said this. And it's not really rooted in any direct experience. I've met a lot of psychology students and even professionals, and I've felt just by interacting with them that they've never really had a lot of deep insight into themselves and how they work. And so I don't know, how does that fit? How can you do psychotherapy if you've not had any deep insight into your own workings? How can you then work with other people to help them have the same deep insight? I don't see that. And I think meditation can offer that to us. And actually what we're seeing in practice is that when meditation is brought into standard techniques like cognitive behavioral therapy, for example, it's like a catalyst. It supercharges the therapeutic effort. And something like mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, for example, is as effective as antidepressants for a range of conditions like anxiety, depression, and so on. So this isn't just me waxing lyrical about meditation. This is real. And meditation catalyzes this stuff. And as I said, I think you need that first-hand experience as a therapist. Otherwise, how can you effectively lead others to change themselves? The second point I want to make is that patients learn tools through meditation. Whenever I've had therapy, it's been sort of cathartic and it's helped me see my own patterns more clearly, but the types of therapy I've done, they've never really given me any lasting skills. I've always felt quite dependent on the therapist because they're doing something, they're following some standard technique, some sort of methodology, some sort of algorithm, and I'm just on the receiving end. I don't really know what's going on. It's sort of like when you type something into Google, something comes out. You don't know what's actually going on behind the scenes. You just see the end result. That's how I often felt with therapy. And listen, in my case, I didn't pay for therapy because I got it when I was a student and it was subsidized by the university. But imagine you're paying $150, $100 for a session, and that's not really even that expensive in the grand scheme of things when it comes to therapy. Do you get any lasting tools from that? Do you get tools that you can use for the rest of your life? Do you get transformative tools? I think that's a key question. It's kind of like going to see a dietitian. Imagine going to see a dietitian. You've got weight problems. You don't know how to eat properly. You're not looking after yourself. And they just give you a recipe to follow. They give you like this meal plan, but they don't, it just, it's got all the food you need to cook. It's got all the recipes and so on. But they don't actually teach you the principles of healthy eating. They don't teach you, what vitamins and minerals you need. They don't teach you about carbohydrates or protein. Where does that leave you after you've been working with that person? It leaves you in no man's land because you're not really learning the deep. You're not really learning anything lasting. It's like the old adage of give a man a fish, you'll feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish, you'll feed him for a lifetime. Are we feeding people for a lifetime, or are we just giving them a temporary solution? If a therapist just helps a patient with their current problem, it doesn't guarantee in any way that the patient will be any more prepared for the next problem unless they're given some sort of permanent tool. And when we're talking about mental health, it's really important. Are we giving people a temporary solution like a plaster, or are we actually helping them address the wounds there, giving them a tool to do so? In meditation, this is by its very nature, because it's so hands-on, and because when you go to a class or when you do any form of guided meditation or you do some sort of course, the meditation teacher ideally, sometimes this doesn't happen, but this is how I do it. The meditation teacher is actually doing exactly what they're guiding you to do. They're not just standing there, like a physical education teacher, shouting at the students, just telling them what to do. And they're just standing there with a whistle, time's up. The meditation teacher is in that very process with you. They are teaching you the skill that they are using and that they've mastered. And you then learn that skill. You can take it away. You can use it whenever you want. You can develop it whenever you want because you're learning the actual technique that you need to do that. And then, later in life, weeks, months, years down the line, when you need that stuff, you're going to know what to do. You've got the tools there, not just for when you're having a difficult time, but whenever you need those tools. And as I said, you can train these up. You can meditate whenever you want. You don't have to be sitting with a meditation teacher so long as you have adequate guidance. And no one can take this away from you. The skill of meditation doesn't just go away when the session finishes. It's in your hands, and no one can decide, well, that's it, you're not doing your meditation anymore. It's fundamentally your choice, and I think that's very powerful. I also want to say that meditation starts as something that you do for a certain amount of time per day, 20 minutes, half an hour, 45 minutes, whatever it is. But more and more, your meditation starts to infuse your entire life. So you're not just meditating when you're sitting down, you're actually meditating, you're bringing it into your daily life. And your baseline skills reach a point where they're available to you no matter what. And in that sense, it brings permanent transformation. It brings a change to your baseline state, to how you are in the world by default. And I don't think therapy offers that to people. Does it ever offer you permanent transformation? I'm not so convinced it does. And my experiences with therapy is that it's been like putting a temporary plaster over the wound, or being given one fish for the day. Whereas what I could have done with that at the time was a set of permanent tools, a new way of understanding myself, a new way of seeing life and seeing myself and seeing the world, and an empowerment, not a temporary thing, but a real empowerment. Say, take this and run with it for the rest of your life and see where it takes you. Meditation is a very powerful tool for self-knowledge and personal transformation. And patients and therapists need this tool, because that's what we're doing. In therapy, we are trying to self-transform. Of course, it has oftentimes that's a very sort of immediate goal. But if we're not giving people tools that are permanent and help them work on themselves as much as they want for the rest of their life, we're failing people, in my opinion, especially when it comes to something like meditation, which is so powerful. Okay, so now we're getting to the real heart of my message here. And the third reason we want to incorporate meditation into psychotherapy is to gain insight into our very identity. And in my opinion, without this, therapy is incomplete. No matter how well it works, it's still incomplete, because it's not showing you the greater context of your psychology and of who you are. And this is what meditation really gives us. It's one of meditation, it's not its only area of specialty, area of use, but it's one of the ones that meditation and meditation alone will give you. And it's been doing this for centuries and millennia very effectively, but in the West we're quite ignorant of it, unfortunately. Meditation can give you a very different perspective on your identity, your sense of who you are, and in a bit more detail, that the thoughts and emotions and the body and the mind and the habits that you experience create a person that you identify with, a person that appears to be there, but when you look closer, it's not actually who we are. The insight stated very carefully is that there is no thing that is our self. It's not that we don't have a self at all, but it's that our true self is not actually a thing. It's empty, pure emptiness, pure beingness. And it's really our identification with the objects of our consciousness, with our mind and body, that creates a solid sense of identity. The solid sense of identity is really an illusion. And I, frankly, see very, very few therapeutic systems or methods or therapists who have seen this for themselves. And to me, without this perspective, you can't really do therapy, because I'm not saying that it won't be effective as like a kind of plaster, but you're going to be missing the bigger context of all this. As Sasaki Roshi said, one of the greatest Zen masters of all time, he said, quote, "All your problems go back to your belief that you have a self. There is no thing called a self," end quote. So how can we change our relationship to our problems? How can we work through our problems without understanding that there is no thing called a self? To me, it's it's astounding that this isn't part of therapy, because for one thing, how can a therapist help someone without at least intellectually knowing that this is true about human beings? How is that possible? And how can you possibly help someone when you're fundamentally misunderstanding the human identity and how the identity works and how none of it is actually who we are? What I'm saying here might sound a bit weird, like if you're not familiar with this, but I'm really not seeing anything new. This knowledge has been around for thousands of years. It's been around since before the Buddha, before Buddhism. And it's really formed the backbone of all the deep forms of Christianity, Buddhism, Judaism, Sufism, and so on, any major spiritual system that you can name. And it's been rediscovered over and over again by different people. So this is really just a deep fundamental truth about who we are as human beings. Truly, when you get down to it, we are not our mind and our body. We are not who we identify to be. We are not this character we are playing. We're something much deeper than that. And to me, all therapy without that perspective, and that is 99% of therapy, it's all just window dressing. We're rearranging the accoutrements of the self, the surface level. We're changing our thoughts. We're releasing stored emotions. We're understanding the patterns in our lives better. But actually, we're not understanding the deep core, the underlying fact of the matter, which is that our very identity is not what we think it is. There is no thing called the self. How can you possibly do therapy effectively without that insight? So you might wonder at this point, well, what are you advocating here, Ross? That therapists are all Buddhist monks, and that if you're not a monk, then you can't be a therapist? No, I'm not advocating that, but I'm saying therapists need some serious training in meditation. Because if you're not getting that, you're missing out some crucial insight into yourself and into the human condition that will fundamentally change your view of all therapy. And know that at Jon Kabat-Zinn's Centre, that all employees, it doesn't matter what rank they are, from receptionist to Jon Kabat-Zinn himself, they all must have a regular meditation practice. So this isn't really anything new I'm advocating. All therapists could be the same, when you're going through an undergrad or a master's degree or whatever, you have to undertake meditation training. It's mandatory. You have to uphold a daily practice. You have to go for weekly classes. You have to, there's a reading list. There's certain meditation techniques you have to do and so on. I think that must be mandatory because in psychology, we're very good at accumulating knowledge and theories and, choosing who's the best psychologist of all time and all of this. But it doesn't mean that as a therapist you have any real self-understanding or embodiment. And I find that often therapists are just regurgitating the theories and the sort of the common practices and systems that are out there. They're not speaking from a place of knowledge like a spiritual master would. They're not really embodying what they're telling you to try and find. There's nothing really deep there. Often I find they're very unfulfilled people. And it's like, well, how can you lead someone to a greater life if you yourself are suffering in a very profound way? There's a disconnect here. And I think meditation would solve a lot of that. So you can actually take psychotherapy. We don't have to throw away all these wonderful theories. We can take it and we can combine it with meditation, and one will inform the other. The stuff that meditation can't get to, psychotherapy will show us, and the stuff that psychotherapy, the fundamentally flawed perspective of psychotherapy, can be healed and upgraded by meditation. We can bring in the perspective of no self, of the fact that the mind and the body is not really who we are anyway, that our identity based on this attachment to the mind and body is really it's false, it's a construction. We can bring that in And this will just accelerate the therapeutic process. And as I said, meditation-based therapeutic approaches are being shown to be very effective. And so that's what I propose, that we make meditation a fundamental part of psychological training. All right, I hope that was informative and interesting for you if you're a therapist or a patient or just interested in personal growth. I've got a course called Beginner's Mindfulness Meditation. I'll put a link to that in the description if you want to check it out. You learn all the fundamental mindfulness practices. It's a great way to get started with meditation. You also learn a lot of the underlying theory. There's that word again. You'll also learn a lot of the underlying theory, the benefits, how to uphold a daily practice, and so on. It's a really fantastic foundation for meditation practice. And do stick around on the YouTube channel. Make sure to subscribe. I've got new content coming almost every single day. So I really hope you stick around. Hope you dig what I do. Thanks for supporting me. And I shall see you soon.